Hello and welcome to this recap of the Core Maths meeting held at Marylebone School on the 22nd of March. There were 7 or 8 people there on the day, and we talked about the things you can see on the screen in front of you, the Smith report briefly, where to go with online lessons, and then had quite a thorough look at the preliminary materials that have been released by AQA. So first of all, the Smith report. First of all, it's not out yet. It has been written. I've got some idea of what's in it. So here is what I gleaned from a meeting held at the Royal Society where Adrian Smith answered various questions on his forthcoming report. First of all, compulsory maths for post-16? No, it does not propose compulsion for maths for post-16 students. However, and there is a however, it does state this uptake should be near universal. He's clearly pushing for a lot more students to do maths, so that agenda continues in government. He also, interestingly, although this was not part of his official brief, has stated GCSE resits are not a solution. He's picked up that they are not popular with teachers and has fed that back to government. Core Maths might be part of the solution, but the problem with Core Maths is that in many academic circles it's seen as a sort of level 2.5. So if you went down a level, you'd end up at level 1.5, and it probably doesn't have quite the beef to cut back in that sort of a way. However, there could be something around there based around Core Maths and also functional skills. We will find that out in due course. Nothing on the horizon at the moment. Next, is Sir Adrian Smith in his report supportive of Core Maths? Yes, very. It's one of the big messages that's in his report, and we may be getting a bit more funding. It's interesting, the report actually says every school should be offering Core Maths within X years. That's actually the phrase used in the report, but it looks like X is in the 5 to 10 year band. He is also asking for money, which is one of the reasons why there has been a delay, I suspect. Also Brexit, which seems to be delaying everyone. I'm quite hopeful that the report might come out very soon after Article 50 is triggered, because it ties in with the skills and industry agenda. These are the skills our people will need in the brave new post-Brexit world. We will see. Could be something in the press over the next week or so. Adrian Smith, in his speech, was confident, that was his word, that there will be some more money for Core Maths, and one of the main places that might be going to is further education. FE, in his words, has been woefully underfunded, and professional development for FE teachers is a priority for him. If there is extra money, it may be going in that direction. Could be good news for some people. He's also into technology. Clever uses of technology was the phrase he used, and as Chancellor of the University of London runs some excellent online schemes. I'm, for instance, doing an online master's at the London University, sort of via the IOE, but through their international programs. It is outstanding. It's a very good course, and so he is pushing clever uses of technology, FE, and Core Maths. Those were probably the 3 big messages from his report. Okay, that was the first thing on the agenda for this brief session. Next one, online Core Maths, a clever use of technology, to use Sir Adrian Smith's term. We have been pressing on with that. You'll be aware that here at Marylebone, we've historically had 3 hours face-to-face teaching this year. It was 2 hours last year. Next year, we're going to have 3 hours for year 13, but for year 12, it looks like we can only afford 1 hour face-to-face teaching a week. So I proposed 1.5 to 2 hours of video-supported learning a week. This means a new type of teaching video from the online maths courses that have historically been available, things like Maths Watch you may be familiar with. Many of those things are pitched at preparing for the exam revision, here's how to do the question. I'm looking at something quite different. I'm looking for first teaching tools. I'll give you some links shortly which you can use to look at some of the lessons that are currently available if you haven't seen them. And the idea is that these relatively brief 15-minute introductions will provide frameworks for thinking about topics and be followed up with tasks that students can work on together in a room. There is not a plan for people to study this at home, although these videos, once they're out there, can be used any way you like. Here is the scheme of work for the first module that we're planning to do in September 2017. The plan is to have 30 different lessons available online by September for the start of a new academic year. As you can see, only 3 of these are done. A 4th is underway. There's been a request from some of my year 13s who are doing their exam in 6 weeks' time for something on compound interest and the horrible compound interest formula. So I may do that one before I do percentages as multipliers. If you'd like to take part in providing resources for this, and we can pay for this, a lesson should be about 15 slides. The pedagogy needs to be embedded clearly in the sequence of slides, so you need to think very, very carefully about how to teach it. Ideally, you would be preparing lessons on something that you have done yourself. So if you have taught any of the things on that screen, do let me know, and perhaps we can come to some agreement. There is a budget to pay for people's time. So that's what's coming up in terms of Marylebon's online offering. For your information, you may have heard of MOOCs, the massive online open courses. What we're creating here is a SPOC, a small private online course. There are acronyms for everything. That is where we are with online stuff. The problem we have is that's how long it takes. I find that it takes me about half a day to a day to actually write a PowerPoint, and by the time I've recorded and edited a video, it's 2 or 3 hours, so it's a day per episode, a day per show, a day per lesson. These are the lessons that we have in place. And you can get hold of these by emailing me. I will post these links these links will be posted underneath the video. So, preliminary materials for the AQA paper. Here are the preliminary papers materials for AQA's paper 1 this year. They're all about money. This stuff here, if you've looked at any of these specimen materials before, are very familiar. Tax, national insurance, that's in every year. You know there is going to be a tax and national insurance question. There's also a bit of stuff here about the national minimum wage. Notice there is nothing on student loans. There will probably be a question on student loans, but the necessary information will be in the question. I suspect that's because now the student loan situation is relatively straightforward. Everyone's now paying this 9% over £21,000, whereas for legacy reasons, some people who were starting university or were currently at university would have been paying 9% above the 17,000 for a much lesser loan. So nothing on student loans in there. Other than that, it's pretty standard. If you're interested, the NI thresholds have stayed the same apart from the 12% one, and personal allowances and 40% thresholds are up. In other words, tax thresholds have gone up more or less in keeping with inflation. What did we think at the meeting last Wednesday that the questions might be? Well, here are some of the questions we came up with. Because they've included the stuff in the minimum wage, we came up with a whole bunch of questions relating to minimum wages. In order to do this, your students will need to know that there are 52 weeks in a year and 12 months in a year. They probably know about the 12 months. I was amazed at how many of them put numbers between 50 and 53 for the number of weeks in a year. So when I asked them these questions, they were perfectly capable of doing the interest rate calculations. So, assuming your students have been well briefed on the number of weeks in a year, so that's 52 weeks and 12 months, we made up a bunch of questions like, how much tax and NI will a 17-year-old on the minimum wage for 40 hours a week have to pay? Interestingly, none. When you do 40 hours times 52 weeks times £3.87, it comes in at about £15 or £20 under the NI threshold. So all they pay on this bottom rate is NI, no tax. Interestingly, when it goes up, they just cross the tax threshold, but NI is the main cost, and at 21, they're paying both. I think the questions are going to be somewhere around about there. There are some examples. You can ask stuff about what's the percentage increase in net pay, what's the increase in tax when they move from one threshold to another. Notice also there is the living wage, which is payable for people over 25. So that's kind of another step on the minimum wage scale. There you are. That's what we thought they're going to be asking about taxation on paper 1. It's probably going to be about the minimum wage. Other than that, those questions are fairly standard. They'll just have to work out from these figures what those annual and weekly pay packets are. Those are our thoughts on the first part of paper 1. Next part of paper 1, this report here by Visit England. One of the things that's quite noticeable about the preliminary materials this year is they're a lot less contrived than they were last year. The England Occupancy Survey, you can do a Google search on that and you can actually get the actual surveys that this stuff is taken from. You can look at the most recent one. It will have, interestingly, their charts are more like bar charts, which you could argue are probably more sensible. When you're looking at this figure, it's not clear what, if I drew a line from there to there, what does that mean? I mean, what month is halfway between January and February? What was the occupancy halfway between January and February? Because that figure there is actually an average for a month. So it's a bit of a strange way of drawing the chart. However, it does show a definite shape for room occupancy over the year. Also notice up here, there are lots of percentages. Look, in 2014, room occupancy rates were 73%. Cities and large towns were 78%, 61% occupancy at the coast, 58% in rural areas. So could well ask for something. You could compare the average occupancy here in York with those average rates. Is York doing better than average? Is it doing better than your average city and large town? Also, there are forecasts here. It's a bit weird that in the 2017 exam they're showing you some 2014 figures. Could be a question here. So here are some of the questions we came up with, but it's probably worth you taking a look at these resources and having a look at this visitbritain.org site, and you can pull up some other charts. For instance, here is what the actual chart looks like in the most recent Visit England brochure. Now, what I found was when I did this with my class, this question here, which I thought was an excellent question. The report made predictions for the percentage growth in 2015 and 16. I'll get rid of that. Were these predictions correct? So you can look at what it was in 2014 and then in 2015. I suppose you can work out an average occupancy rate and say, oh, has it gone up 1.6%? Well, the weird thing is those 2014 figures are not the same as these 2014 figures. So they're going to have to do something else with these numbers before they got you to compare them. So I wouldn't suggest you use that as it is. But I think they could well ask you to do something about commenting on the validity of the predictions if they give you some more up-to-date numbers in the exam. I think that's a very likely question. Here are some other questions they could ask. Here are some figures we made up for hotel room occupancy in Blackpool. It's at the seaside. So, is Blackpool above average? Bit of critical analysis here. sneaking into paper one. Compare the occupancy rates over the summer months with June to August with York. I did this with my class, so you look at these ones, June to August, and you compare June to August. And you find that Blackpool just sneaks ahead. But compare the lower quartile of monthly occupancy rates for York and Blackpool. The box plots for York and Blackpool are very, very different. They could ask a question about that. They could give you a box plot for one of these and say, compare this with hotel occupancy in York and comment on where the best place is to run a hotel. What you find when you draw that is that the Blackpool one is very, very spread out. York is quite bunched up. Look, their lowest number's about 58%, but apart from that 1 month of January, everything is 70% or above. Whereas they've got, it creeps above 70% there. They've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months above 70%. So the range of occupancy is far, far greater. And a couple of other questions down there. Total number of hotel rooms is 6780. What's the average number of rooms occupied during 2014? I guess you can work out some averages from there. And that's the question I raised earlier about joining the dots in that graph. Would it be sensible? I think probably not, but you could have a discussion about it. So that wraps it up for the preliminary paper, for the preliminary materials on paper 1, the standard stuff on tax with some minimum wage material, and this quite rich source of material to do with room occupancy rates. I think the questions could well be in this sort of territory. We'll have to see. Do try and make up some of your own. Maybe you can get your students to make up some of their own. If you come up with any good ones, send them to us and we can pass them around. And so we move on to the preliminary materials for paper 2. Oh, before I go on, that's my paper 1 revision list. Now, I found when I went through these questions in detail, I'd gone through GCSE diagrams. Whoops. I'd gone through GCSE diagrams. I'd gone through mean, median, and mode. I'd looked at quartiles and percentiles. I talked about this business of outliers and standard. I didn't talk about standard deviation. We compared some box plots for York and Blackpool. So in fact, we went through an awful lot of this data handling stuff just by going through those questions with that material. So I think that's quite a useful resource. Now, let's see if I can remember this presentation. We do move on to preliminary materials, paper 2. Now, the first thing you will notice when you look at these is that these materials are more complicated than the ones last year. There's really quite a lot more in it. Another thing that's worth pointing out is, like the stuff about hotel occupancy, this is taken from a real report. This is actually a genuine House of Commons Library briefing paper. And if you go online to the House of Commons, you can get the latest briefing paper, which looks very like this. Notice again, this is 2015. They could well show you the same graphs from a more recent briefing paper and ask you to make comments. I'll show you a question later that does just that. But this stuff is complicated. Have a good look through it. Take half an hour or so going through it yourself. Make sure you understand it all and explore some of the questions that we look at on the next page. First thing you ought to notice is that percentages are mentioned 9 times on this bit of paper. There is bound to be a question on percentages. There will probably be a critical analysis calculation. I'll show you one on the next page, but it's not hard to make them up. So-and-so says unemployment has dropped by X%. Is this correct? And it's certainly worth looking at what the actual briefing papers look like when you download this from the Dropbox, which you will see the address of the Dropbox is shown underneath this video. You will be able to download this presentation with all the links live. So, quite a complicated set of data, two different sets of numbers. Notice we've got unemployment rates 16 to 17-year-olds, 18 to 24-year-olds, and then the aggregate 16 to 24-year-olds. Notice that one there just has the aggregate. So let's look at what makes this set of data complicated to read. Here's the first thing we noticed. Here you are, 628,000 young people aged 16 to 24 were unemployed. 502,000 18 to 24-year-olds were unemployed. You can't compare that and that. I don't think that's terribly clever. I wish they'd make up their mind what the headlines were about. Youth unemployment statistics 60 to 24, unemployment by age 18 to 24. I suppose they talk about 16 to 17-year-olds down here, but you have to read it quite carefully. There are different age groups floating around all over the place. Next thing to notice, there are different time periods being observed. These 16 to 24-year-olds are unemployed for 12 months at August to October 2015, whereas here, 362,000 men aged the same age group were unemployed in September to November 2015. That's a bit messy, actually. That's not very clever. What's wrong with this data set? These are the types of problems that your students should be picking out. So we've highlighted some of them for you. Different age groups, different periods over which the statistics are being considered. Another thing up here, they call that an unemployment rate. Well, a rate is something per something. I suppose you could argue a percentage is something out of, but it's really a level of unemployment. And interestingly, in the more recent reports, it does change that word from rate to level. Bit pedantic, but it is true that a rate is usually concerned with something changing with respect to something else. Now, this chart here is the one that caused the most discussion. Here you can see that employed numbers are going up and unemployed numbers are going down. Interestingly, if you add those two numbers together, 186,000 plus 73,000, you get, what's that, 180, 250 odd thousand. When you add those numbers, you get a slightly different figure, which raises the question, hang on, unemployment's gone down, but there are more people getting jobs than unemployment's gone down. It could be migration, but it could also be this thing of economically inactive. Who are these economically inactive people? Strictly speaking, I'm told by my economist friends that economically inactive people are people who are not working and not available for work. So they don't kind of register for things. Or no, wait a minute. Economically inactive is sort of notionally in the labour market, but not in work. And certain types of full-time course will remove you from the economically inactive because you're busy doing something else. Somewhat confusingly, it says not in full-time education. So the implication is that these people down here are economically inactive and in full-time education. So in some sense, they're available for work. I think that's a rabbit hole that I would recommend you don't go down. We spent far too long discussing the meaning of that phrase in the lesson I went through it. The important thing to notice about these figures here is they look pretty good. The direction of travel is what you want. Fewer people economically inactive, fewer people unemployed, more people employed. Hurrah! Where could we ask questions about this? Well, there's the critical analysis question. Ayali thinks the figure for unemployed 16 to 24-year-olds should be 25.1%. Explain why she is wrong. Well, I suppose you have to think, why on earth would it be 25.1%? I suspect because he's got the wrong denominator. But critical analysis questions to do with percentages almost bound to come up. Here's more what's wrong with this graph question. Somebody thinks that this graph is unclear. Actually, I think it's a bit unclear because where's 2015? And when it says 2014, it's a bit confusing. Look, there's 2012. There's 2014. 2013 is presumably somewhere around the middle. What are these wobbles in the middle? Is that the beginning of 2013 and those are quarters within the year? Is that the middle of the year? Is that the beginning of the tax year? It's not clear what these numbers mean, so I don't think that is particularly clear. I think the timeline is confusing, and I think the fact that it says in the title it goes up to 2015 and on the axis it doesn't say 2015 is just a bit naff. So plenty of things you can say there. And now the political question that we thought of. This is genuine data from a genuine real report. That's real data, okay? I went to the House of Commons Library online and downloaded this. And here's what I came up with as the political questions. Government spokesman claims that these figures demonstrate the success of their policies. Well, these ones do. Unemployment up, unemployment down, economic inactivity down. An opposition spokesman uses the latest figures to dispute the claim. Oh, look, number of employed going up among those not in full-time education, but down overall. On the other hand, unemployment is still going down. Good. But economic inactivity is going up. This is quite an ambiguous picture here. There are lots of negative things you could say about government policy or infer about government policy from this picture here. And given that they've deliberately chosen a report from 2015, the examiners have left themselves the possibility, I mean, that's 2015. They could at least, they could at least go up to 2016, couldn't they? Depending on when the exam actually went to press. So I think there are some pretty obvious questions there that they can ask. Percentages, what's wrong with the chart, and what political point scoring could you do with this data? That's it for this session. I hope you found it useful. Dates to be aware of. Exam dates. Wednesday the 17th of May and Wednesday the 24th of May. I'm sure you know these, but that is just a reminder. So that's less than 2 months. It's about 6 weeks from now. If you need any help with exam materials or anything else, do get in touch with me, Nick McIver, and I hope to hear from you if you have any queries. Talk to you next time. Bye.